Picture this. You're trapped inside of a spaceship and life support has failed. In just a few minutes, you're going to run out of air. Obviously, you can't open the door, so you open your emergency air supply instead. But you're only delaying the inevitable. If only there was a way to transform your toxic carbon dioxide breath back into life-giving oxygen. Then you hear it.
Plants.
Is it really that simple though? The Earth is covered with plants, and they process the air for our 8 billion people, but for just one person in a sealed room. How many plants would they need? That's what I'm gonna find out. And even though our story ends in pretend space, it all began on the real toilet. Scrolling through social media, I came upon a post that said the snake plant is so effective at producing oxygen that if you were in a sealed room with no airflow, you would only need 6 to 8 of them to survive. And that's according to NASA. Now, I've personally thought about this problem ever since I saw a mission to Mars back in the year 2000 when I was 10. You see, space hipster Don Cheadle was getting stranded on Mars way before Matt Damon ever made it cool, and the only reason Don was able to survive was because
it works. You know, I give them CO2 and light, and they give me oxygen and food.
But even though this scenario has been randomly popping into my head for the last 25 years, for most other people, the conversation went like this. Have you ever wondered how many plants that you would need to breathe?
I've not.
So if you're wondering why you should care about this question, let's get some perspective. People can survive some truly harsh places. Siberia, the Sahara, Cleveland. But all of those places have actual breathable air. We take for granted that right now we can breathe everywhere we go on Earth. But last I checked, we haven't discovered any plants in space. Not to mention, we have cut down quite a few of them here. Who knows? In the future, knowing the number of plants that you need to survive could become something that you reference every day. Leaving the house? Wallet, keys, phone, plants. But do you need a green house or just a green backpack? Could scuba divers carry a succulent? Should astronauts just sniff a ficus? It's a fascinating question, and I can't wait to find out. But we can't go to outer space to do it. So we're just gonna have to bring outer space to my inner basement. Now, there weren't any used space capsules for sale on Marketplace, so I'm gonna make my own. And all we really need to do is create an airtight box, one that we can open and close with just enough room for me and some plants, but not so much room that it takes forever to run out of air. Once inside, I'll just breathe. And as my breath turns oxygen into carbon dioxide, I will monitor that CO2 level and use a stopwatch to time how long it takes to reach an unsafe level. Then I'll do the same thing, but with different amounts of plants and compare the times. My first objective is to see if this post about the snake plants is true or false. But either way, my final objective is to find a way to stay in that room and never run out of air using just plants.
So I guess I better build it.
And this is where things get pretty cool and really convenient. You see, a few years ago, I built a science fiction movie set out of foamular board, and for some reason, I've kept it in storage all this time. So not only do I not need to buy these now much more expensive materials, but I also don't need to paint them because they already look like an old spaceship. We'll tape up the seams, we'll fill that stupid gap, get the TV screen there. I'm building a real spaceship. I mean, it's not real, but it's real for our purposes. I'm gonna be able to seal this thing up, and then I'm gonna be able to time how long does it take to saturate it with carbon dioxide. And then when we have plants in here, how much of an effect will it actually have? This is really exciting.
Oh, I like it. I like it a lot.
So my brother, who has built actual houses, seemed to kind of approve of the concept, and with a massive TV that I repaired a while back, I now had a window into space. But this airtight room needs to be airtight, meaning every little gap and crack needs to be covered, and that's where the Gorilla Tape comes in. The only way this works is if we seal up every crack. This thing has to be at least 99%. I have a feeling I'm gonna go through a lot of tape. Now, in the places that needed to stay clear, I used heat-shrinking, window weatherproofing plastic. That includes the light fixtures in the walls, my pretend window, and my actual window / emergency exit. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and seal up the rest of it, and we'll see how long it takes to become a truly toxic work environment. The final touch is a resealable door that has to be taped shut each time. And as a quick test, I decided to fill the room with fog and then look for fog leaking on the outside. I'm not seeing any leaking out.
Oh, damn, that's fancy.
And after a bit of screwing around, it was finally time for us to establish a baseline. Good thing the smoke alarms work. All right, bro, you ready for test one?
Test one.
I've got my stopwatch, I got my pulse ox, I got my emergency stop button, which is this. So yeah, a baseline test basically means just sitting and waiting under the watchful eye of my brother Charles. You gonna keep me alive? It's day one. We're on the surface of Mars, and I am waiting for my imminent doom. We're gonna wait till we get to about 5,000 parts per million of CO2, and then I think I'm gonna call it quits. This test will tell us how long I can stay in the room with no plants and somewhat limited avenues of entertainment. And the barrel is just a physical placeholder so that when we bring the plants in, we'll still be starting with a similar volume of air. And as CO2 levels steadily rose, I found myself waxing eloquent. Optimism is the lifeblood of a spacecraft. Without optimism, you would die. And oxygen is also important.
Now, what do these numbers actually mean? Well, the air outside usually sits at around 400 parts per million. That means that for every million bits of air, 400 of them are CO2, or about 0.04%. To contrast, the air that you breathe out sits at around 38,000 parts per million. Now, above 2,000 parts per million is where things start to get really spicy. These levels are associated with headaches, fatigue, loss of focus, nausea, increased heart rate, and they're often an indicator that there's less oxygen in your home because you're probably just breathing the same exhaled breath over and over again. Now, OSHA's personal exposure limit is 5,000 parts per million. Ooh. Anything above that, and you're basically just slowly dying. But back up on Mars, it was taking a long time to actually get to 5,000.
Then I realized, yeah, why do I need to go to 5,000? I could just go to 2,000, right? You see, I really just needed something to aim at. This was taking longer than I thought, and conveniently, I was about to hit 2,000 right at 30 minutes.
Smells like wrong dog in here.
All right, I'm gonna eat lunch.
Say the word.
So where do you get a bunch of snake plants? Well, your local orange home improvement store has them for about 25 bucks each, but that would be $200 for 8. What if I need more? But what am I gonna do? It's not like I'm gonna just stumble upon a bunch of cheap snake plants from some random dude on Marketplace.
So the random dude on Marketplace was named Charles, and after showing me his home ecosystem, and after paying him a mere $70, I now had a lot of snake plants. And since the social media post says as few as 6 snake plants, that's what I decided to start with, the bare minimum. Bro, you ready for this very scientific test?
Lock you in a box.
There, we got a bunch of plants going on.
Lights going on, side of a box. Got a window cut into the box.
Yes, well, it's a very scientific box. So the post said 6 to 8 snake plants in a sealed room. I figured it would make sense to test the minimum 6, right? Because any random person reading that is gonna go, huh, if I just put 6 snake plants in a room, I'll be fine. All right, doors closed, starting timer. We are starting with a base reading of 836 parts per million. Well, last time I was at 670, but we've got 6 snake plants. There's no way that these snake plants won't be able to offset that extra amount. The post said this would work. And of course, we all know the post never lies. Test number 2, almost 15 minutes. CO2 meters freaking out. I forgot to turn off the alarm. There we go. If it's not beeping, it's not a problem. So the first test started at 670 and then hit 2,000 parts per million at 30 minutes, giving us a CO2 saturation rate of 44.4 parts per million per minute, or ppm/pm. Which is why it was surprising that even with the 6 plants, CO2 was still climbing pretty darn quick. I just thought of like a question that I didn't really ask. What do I do if I have to poop? We're at 30 minutes and we're at 2120. Pretty much a wash from the first test. 6 snake plants, you're gonna die. That's right, our ppm/pm went from 44.4 to 42.8, meaning at most we had like 4% reduction in CO2, but I'm willing to bet that our margin of error is at least 5%, so best to get more green and give it another try. Side note, I am going to be at Open Sauce the weekend of June 14th, a place where all your wildest dreams come true, in so much as they conform to their scheduled offerings. But I am seriously excited, and you should definitely check out the website and get some tickets. I'd love to see you there. And I even have 1 ticket to give away, so leave me a comment, let me know. What funny thing would you say if you saw me in the crowd? And maybe you'll get a chance to say it for real. Charles, what are your predictions?
I don't think that 12 snake plants would be like enough.
You saw the post. It said 6 to 8 snake plants. And yet somehow, with now 12 snake plants, double the minimum, and 50% more than their claimed max, our CO2 saturation rate looked eerily familiar. It's full of snake plants. How can it still be basically the same rate? We know that there's going to be little variances here and there. My metabolic rate in the actual volume of stuff taking up plate space in the room, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that, like, if these things would make you live, according to that post with 6, well then double that should easily make up for any variances. Or at the very least, make a dent. Even I could fit like, maybe 6 more snake plants, but we already know that adding another 30% of no appreciable difference is 30% of nothing. And think about it, this is like, who has this many houseplants? And it's not even enough to make a measurable difference in your own CO2 output. Isn't that crazy? A person with what most would consider a lot of houseplants isn't even making a dent. We're gonna have to seriously reevaluate just what I'm doing here, because I want to be trapped in this room with plants and I want them to keep me alive. But they're letting me down. That post let me down. This is not looking good.
So what do you do when regular plants just aren't gonna cut it? Well, here's where I may have misled you just a little bit. Not about plants. We're still gonna do this with plants. But I kind of already knew that snake plants weren't gonna be enough. You see, I try and do a little research before I do a project, and I quickly found that you need like a lot of plants to make this work, which is why in the background I've secretly been preparing a plan B that fits neatly into this little vial, Chlorella vulgaris, a plant that we've actually already started experimenting with in space. To the average person, this is just algae, the green goo that grows in water. It's still a plant, but with some very, very special attributes. You see, land plants like the snake plant have a variety of complex structures: leaves, roots, stems and shit. On the resource balance sheet, specialized parts just require more cost, and it means they take longer to grow, and they only really produce oxygen when they're growing. Algae like chlorella, they're just like cells. They're like the bacteria version of plants, just reproducing over and over again, meaning they can produce way more oxygen, way quicker, and with way less space.
But not everyone was impressed by the idea, or at least not impressed by my first small growing chamber.
You're just like blowing bubbles into a piss bottle. When I came down here, I was expecting to see like multiple fish tanks, but there's just this one little bucket with a piss bottle in it. That's all you have.
Yes.
You're gonna die. It's
like,
not even green. It's just like pea yellow.
That's after like a week of growth. Yes, 1 week gave me this yellowed bottle, and then I transferred that bottle to an even bigger bottle. And after another week, that bottle had turned into this bottle.
That is green.
Which quickly became these bottles, and were transferred to these bottles. Satisfying, isn't it? These 5 2-liter bottles in a 5-gallon bucket were my first prototype for a portable photobioreactor. Now, what is a photobioreactor? Well, it's a fancy word for something really simple. Photo refers to light, bio refers to life, and reactor, well, the life reacts to the light to convert CO2 to oxygen as it grows. And we maximize the CO2 that the life is exposed to by pumping air into the bottoms of the bottles. But just how powerful is this little glowing bucket? Well, there is a consumer product called the Arium, which is basically a photobioreactor marketed to the average Joe. With a tank that appears to be around the size of one 2-liter bottle, they say that their reactor has the power of 25 plants. And that's using less efficient spirulina algae. So under optimal conditions, this little bucket could theoretically be more effective than 125 plants. But will that be enough? It's time to go back to space and find out. Close me in, brother. All right, the door is closed. Test number 4, our number 1 algae test. Running the algae generator 1000. This is uncharted territory for me, but I'm excited. I got algae in a bucket. Mission log, day 4. I can either look out this lovely window right here, or I can look out this one. Yes, this window right here is quite lovely. All jokes aside, and as I slowly dissociated beyond the surface of Mars, I reflected on just how far I had come. That is, until I noticed a malfunction.
One of my pumps ain't pumping. We're only operating at 80% for this first test. That's just the way it's gonna be. Not a big deal. You know, we're doing multiple tests.
But even with our 80% or 100 plant power, the CO2 still steadily rose in a surprisingly familiar fashion.
We're approaching 2,000 parts per million, and we're approaching 30 minutes. Dang it. Yesterday we tested with just 4 of the tanks bubbling. Didn't really notice a difference. I thought, wow, this reactor should really be like multiple times stronger than the plants. Well, this time I've taken it a little, that.
So back before I multiplied my first 2-liter bottle, I began growing a separate batch using 4-gallon bottles. This was a bit of an experiment since my 2-liter bottles started with completely pure distilled water, and these would use the regular bottled water that they came with from the store. I did aerate them ahead of time to try and ensure that any potential chlorine or chloramine was fully evaporated, and then I meticulously prepped the water with baking soda, minerals, and plant food. The same thing I had done with all the algae water up to this point. I then evenly distributed the algae and kept this batch running in the background in case something happened to the primary batch, or just in case I needed more. And it was pretty clear by test 5 that I needed more.
Here are our 5 4-gallon tanks. Got a lot of light shining right now. Got a little fan helping to circulate that. I got a fan here helping to circulate. A little fan here pulling air through these holes. Even though yesterday the small photobioreactor was only running at 80% capacity, it still didn't show anything. So I didn't want to do a test where I just ran it at 100% capacity just to show that it still didn't really do anything appreciable. So that's why right now we're running both systems. If this ends up being more than enough, then I'll just back it off and find out exactly how much I need.
But it quickly became clear that backing off wouldn't be our problem.
Seems like we're on track to have about the same result. I just want to get to a point where at the very least there's a measurable amount. Like instead of being only a half an hour in this room before reaching 2,000, it's 40 minutes. That would blow my mind. And of course, this isn't a laboratory. I mean, I'm a guy in my basement, but I want to demonstrate that it's possible, that it's doable, and just about how much that would take. Okay, I think something might be happening. Everything seemed on track, but now we're at 27.5 minutes and we're only at 17:30. Now, I mean, the plants run on CO2, so as the CO2 concentration increases in the room, maybe they become more efficient. Maybe they start growing faster.
I ended that test with 41.6 ppm/PM, the lowest ever. And when I ran the same test again the next day,
30 minutes and we're at 18:05. That's pretty good. I'll check in when we hit 2,000. All right, 2,000 at 35 minutes and 50 seconds.
we were definitely in a downward trend, and this test had averaged an even lower 39.1 ppm/PM. But these results could still possibly be within my margin of error. How could I possibly know without doing way more tests or growing way more algae? So remember when I said that I had the second system growing in the background? Well, it wasn't the only other system that I had growing. Okay, so in my reading, I saw that the Russians had done something similar to this in the 1970s, and it required, like, a lot of algae. So I decided to grow a lot of algae, and to try and be smart about it. Giant clear containers aren't easy to find or cheap, but these 55-gallon food-grade barrels were less than $10 each.
Yeah, that actually just smells like a light kombucha.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, algae needs a lot of light distributed as evenly as possible, but these opaque sides rule out an external light source, and the only immersive algae light that I could find was $2,000. So I decided to design my own with some Amazon grow lights, clear heat shrink, and hot glue. The materials for 2 of these cost me only 5% of that $2,000. And with the addition of some tubing and aquarium aerating stones to produce fine bubbles, they could now slide down the middle of the tank and shine out in all directions through the well-aerated algae. Even though these lights are quite bright, it didn't take long for the algae to make them much darker.
The light is barely getting through now.
Or for them to really start scrubbing out the CO2.
I did it. I now have 100 gallons of algae. Tomorrow, I'm gonna try and breathe using just this algae and the algae that's already, in the room. All right, we are at test number 7.
I think. This is a very special test. Now we have 100 more gallons of algae. It's crazy. I'm so excited for this one because this is the one where something's gonna happen. And I have this tube. My breath is the most dangerous thing in this room because it has the highest concentration of carbon dioxide. So this tube is connected to the intake of the air pumps. That way, it runs my breath directly through the algae, giving them more food and scrubbing out as much CO2 as possible right away. We got the beeping going because we just crossed into 1500 territory. 1500, we're at almost 24 minutes. I think we're doing really well. And now for the first time in this whole process, I was surprised in a good way. Whoa, no way. No way. It's only gone up 75 parts per million in the last 6 minutes. How is that possible? 30 minutes in, we're at 1588. I'm just gonna sit here puffing on this for a while. The CO2 increase kept slowing down the higher it got. Maybe because the algae was getting more efficient, or maybe because we were approaching equilibrium. But either way, I wasn't complaining. Okay, we are at 39 minutes. And we're at 1760. The CO2 is crawling. It's at 99. We're at 99. I'm not feeling lightheaded or anything. I'm feeling perfectly normal. 1800. We just reached 1800 parts per million, and now we're at 43 minutes. And just like that, the 40-minute milestone was in the rear-view mirror. Can't believe I've made it this far. Like 2 months ago, I was like, I should probably start growing algae. And while I was looking in that rear-view mirror, I found myself reflecting. Now, I've had a lot of projects lately, like my rubber band car that only went, like not even 5 miles an hour. I'm not gonna complain and say it's hard. Like, obviously it's hard. It's a ton of work. But I'm glad I did this one. A part of me wonders, I don't know if this video will do well. It's kind of, I think it's really cool. I think it's really cool. Said as he breathed into a tube. With our over 100 gallons of algae, it took us 55 minutes to reach 2,000 parts per million for an insane average ppm of 24.5. And I had a plan to do even better. I'm gonna get more air pumps, and we're gonna let the algae keep growing. I'm gonna do this again tomorrow. Why am I still breathing into this tube? Just got another pump and more tubing and aquarium stones. I'm super excited. We're gonna double the airflow through it. Certainly there was no way we were maximizing the surface area of that algae. This could make all the difference. This could be the final brick in the foundation of being able to breathe in space or in this sealed space in my basement. I'm excited. Test number 8. We got the 2 air pumps. I've got them both hooked up to this funnel. That's a weird feeling when this sucks to your face. Wow, we're at 15 minutes and we're at 1110 parts per million. I don't know, it's so non-linear, not even worth really speculating. Meaning, like always, we probably wouldn't see a big difference until the levels got higher. This thing keeps sucking to my face. I just realized that as I get closer and closer to the finish line, I'm gonna have to spend a lot more time in this room.
You see, as a differential approaches equilibrium, it slows down. Big gap, big movement. Small gap, small movement. So finding the level where the CO2 actually stops going up could take a long time.
I'm the one who devised this whole premise and these experiments. It's my decision. It's still a long time to sit in a room with a funnel on your face. But I had never been this close to victory and patiently passed the minutes to get there. 30 minutes, 1363. But since I was only measuring CO2 and not the oxygen in the air, I thought it would be a good idea to do a little research. Let's read the symptoms of hypoxia. Restlessness, headache, confusion, anxiety, rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, difficulty breathing, or shortness of breath. So, if I get a headache while I'm in here, if I start having anxiety while I'm in here, or rapid heart rate, I'm gonna pull the plug. Difficulty breathing, definitely pulling the plug. Confusion, I'm always a bit confused. So in good health, I pushed forward, and man, were we going forward. We're just about to cross the 60-minute line, 1700 parts per million. Going very slowly, but it's not stopping. I wish it was stopping. We're approaching 1 hour, 20 minutes. 1831. It was creeping and all of a sudden it just shot up 2040 because I wasn't breathing in this, so I was taking a selfie and all of a sudden boom. But So 30 minutes had become an hour and 30 minutes. But that's just to 2,000 parts per million. And during my next test, I realized that my breath, after coming out of the algae, was being reduced by over 90%, meaning the room might stabilize around 3,500 parts per million.
The most concentrated anything is what's coming right out of my mouth right now. And putting the reading right at the output, what I'm gonna get is the highest concentration post-algae. Theoretically, this room shouldn't get any higher than that reading.
But getting there could take a very long time. So for the next test, I came up with a plan. Yes, that is a CO2 tank, and the plan is to jump the CO2 into the high 3,000s and then wait and see. Does it go down?
It's holding right around 3557. Let's see if we can make it go down.
And once the CO2 had mixed evenly into the air and the meter stabilized, I started exhaling only into the funnel and waited.
For 29 minutes, it's going up really slowly, but it won't go down.
I didn't dare speak and accidentally leak some CO2, but I checked the meter and timer religiously, waiting for the flip. Then it happened, and all I could do was silently freak out. But the battle wasn't over yet. I still had to make sure that this was really happening. But as the CO2 slowly began creeping up again, I checked the output of the algae tank, and it wasn't great.
All right, I can talk. Hey, the room has held. It's held right around there. It's dropped, gone up a little, dropped. It seemed like it's holding steady, but I will say that the air coming out of the big algae tanks it's like 4,100, so it's elevated. The success is tenuous at best. It's probably just gonna slowly elevate over time. This is a system, it's underpowered. I'm thinking that I probably would need another 50-gallon setup.
So I built another 50-gallon setup. The following tests seemed to show stability in the high 3,000s. So I added another 50 gallons, which seemed to stabilize in the high 2,000s. But all of this was with artificially introduced CO2, and each test only took place over the course of an hour or so.
It was like 29, 15, 14, 13, and then it was 29, 17, 19, now it's 29, 10.
And you know, I just wasn't certain that this really proved that it was working. Plus, up to this point, I had still never measured the actual oxygen levels of the room, and I realized that there was no way around it. I was gonna need to get an oxygen gas meter, do a new baseline test all the way to 5,000 with the reactors turned off, then turn them back on and settle in for the biggest test of all.
And that's what I'm gonna do, spend a day in the sealed room. But I haven't done it yet because it's a big deal to spend an entire day in a sealed room.